All right, let's get right into it. Today, we're digging into the history of the indigenous peoples of Long Island. And it's not a story of disappearance like you might have heard. No, it's a story of incredible endurance. It's a narrative that's literally written in the land, in the water, and in records that reveal this continuous, powerful fight for identity and for sovereignty. Okay, so first things first. Before anyone called it Long Island, it was Paumanok. That's an Algonquian name. And to really get a handle on this story, you have to start with the names. Why? Because they show this incredibly deep connection between the people and the place that goes back thousands and thousands of years. So for millennia, right, the ancestors of the Shinnecock and Montaukett peoples, they lived in a world that was completely defined by the water all around them. I mean, their entire lives were shaped by the rhythm of the tides, the seasonal runs of fish, and all the incredible bounty they could find in the coastal marshes and bays. And get this, their language, it wasn't just about naming places. It was more like a user's manual for the entire island. It described what you could do there. So Niamuk wasn't just a dot on a map. It was the canoe place, the spot where you could easily paddle between bays. Namok was simply a fish place. It shows this really intimate, practical knowledge of their world. And here's what's so cool. Archaeology totally backs this story up. When scientists excavate old village sites, they find these huge refuse heaps called middens, and something like 65% of all the food remains are shellfish. This proves that this wasn't just about scraping by to survive, they were thriving on this amazing abundance the island provided. And we're not just talking about physical survival here. This was a complete world, with a really deep spiritual life that was tied directly to the landscape itself. The honored dead were buried in sacred spots on sandy hills overlooking the water. And they found these ceremonial dog burials, which suggest this powerful belief in the connection between the human and animal spirit worlds. It was all part of their worldview. But then, everything changes. When European colonists show up in the 17th century, a totally new and disruptive story gets forced onto the land. And that story centered on this single huge conflict over the very meaning of what it means to own the ground beneath your feet. And this is the absolute heart of the conflict. You have to understand these were two completely different ways of seeing the world. For the Shinnecock and Montaukett, land wasn't something you owned privately. It was a resource for the whole community to share and use. A deal was about sharing. But for the English, land was a commodity, something to be bought and sold permanently. So one side thinks they're just granting temporary access, while the other side is convinced they're buying it lock, stock, and barrel. So this massive misunderstanding, it led to what historians now call the deed game. Indigenous leaders who often couldn't even read the English documents they were marking with an X, they figured out pretty quick what was happening. Just listen to this protest from 1666. They're using the colonists' own legal language to fight back, saying, hey, the guys who sold this land had no right to, because the real ownership, the propriety, belongs to all of us, to the community. And the English, well, they found a way to sort of hack the system to make things even easier for themselves. Instead of dealing with the complex, community-based leadership, they'd just pick one leader who seemed friendly, a grand sachem, and treat him like a king who could sign away land for everybody. This whole maneuver just totally undermined traditional leadership and made it way easier to grab huge chunks of territory. So what do you do when your land is shrinking? You adapt. And man, did they adapt. With incredible resilience, indigenous men took their expert skills on the water, skills they perfected over centuries, and applied them to a brand new and really dangerous colonial industry, shore whaling. Just look at these contracts from the time. They tell the whole story. The whaler's skill was absolutely essential to what the colonists called Yi whale design, but the system was just deeply unfair. Notice they're not getting paid in cash, they're getting paid in stuff, pots, coats, shoes, and usually on credit from the company boss. It was a setup, really. It created this cycle of debt that was almost impossible to break. And don't think for a second this was some small little operation. We're talking about a major colonial industry here. 2,148 barrels of whale oil in one town in 1 year. That's a massive amount of product, and it was directly powered by the labor and the incredible skill of Shinnecock, Montaukett, and Unkachag whalers. And here's the catch. Here's the trap, written right into the contract. This clause legally bound the whalers to work for the same company year after year until their debts were paid. But since they were being paid in goods from the company's store, often at inflated prices, the debt just kept growing. It basically turned these expert whalers into indentured servants. So by the time we get to the 19th century, all of this, the land loss, the economic traps, the diseases, it all feeds into this really convenient and totally false story. It's the myth of the vanishing Indian. The narrative was that the indigenous people of Long Island were just tragically fading away. And the local papers just ate it up. I mean, they were eagerly printing these dramatic and completely inaccurate obituaries for people who were very much still there. This whole idea of pure blood was a fiction, of course, but it was a really powerful tool to argue that the culture itself was dying out along with them. And then a real-life tragedy happened that just seemed to confirm this false story for everyone. In the dead of winter in 1876, a ship called the Circassian ran aground in a monster storm. A salvage crew made up of the best and strongest indigenous men was hired to save the cargo. But the storm got worse, the ship broke apart, and all of them were lost to the freezing ocean. The loss of these 10 men was just a devastating blow to their families and to the whole community. Reporters called them the flower of the tribe. And outsiders, they jumped on this. They used this very real, very painful tragedy to basically declare, see, it's over. The story's finished. But here's the thing, it wasn't. Because while all the newspapers are writing these obituaries, a totally different story is unfolding. And you find the proof in the last place you'd ever think to look, in the colonizers' own official town records. Hidden in plain sight is the proof of their persistence. Just look at this. This is from 1886, less than 10 years after that horrible disaster. At the exact same time, people are saying they're all gone. The Shinnecock are holding their annual elections for tribal trustees. Men like Emerson Cuffey and William Bunn are running their own government, managing their community's affairs. This practice had never stopped, not for a second. And this wasn't a one-off thing. This chain of self-government has been unbroken for centuries. You can trace it all the way back to 1792, when New York State officially recognized their trustee system. In the 1880s, those same trustees were authorizing lawsuits to get their land back. In the 1950s, they were allotting property. And today, that same elected system continues to govern the Shinnecock Nation. And that fight for their rights, for their land, it has never, ever stopped. After the state authorized an illegal land deal in 1859, the fight just kept going, eventually moving from local halls into the federal court system. By 1978, the Bayou Nation was formally petitioning the U.S. government, which led to huge legal wins in our own time, affirming their continuous existence and finally leading to their formal federal acknowledgement. And all of this entire story, it brings us to this really powerful concept. It's an idea from the scholar Gerald Weisenor called survivance. See, it's not just about passive survival, just getting by. It's an active, strategic, and persistent struggle to endure, to adapt, and to maintain who you are in the face of incredible pressure to just vanish. The story of the Shinnecock Nation really makes you ask that question, right? What does it truly mean to endure? And what their story shows us is that endurance isn't about being frozen in some romanticized past. No, it's about an unbroken, living, breathing, continuing presence. It's a chain of governance and identity that stretches all the way from ancient Paumanok to today and on into the future.